The arrogance of the Galactic Council. The Grand Chamber of the Galactic Council was a place of power, where the rulers of the universe gathered. Towering aliens of different species sat in their high seats, their glowing eyes fixed on the large holographic display in the center of the room. The image flickered, showing a planet covered in blue oceans and green lands. Earth. Chancellor Vorel of the Xiran Dominion, a tall creature with shimmering silver skin, leaned forward and sneered. This is the species that demands equal status in the galaxy. Pathetic. His voice dripped with disdain. The chamber echoed with laughter. Other council members shook their heads. The idea that humans, a species that had only recently developed faster than light travel, could stand equal to the great empires of the stars was insulting. Ambassador Drulk of the Varixan Confederacy waved a clawed hand dismissively. They are nothing more than children playing with technology they barely understand. Their weapons are weak, their ships are slow, and their numbers are insignificant. Yet they dare to challenge our authority, added Supreme Governor Alfak of the Zinar hegemony, his 6 glowing eyes narrowing. They have refused to follow our trade laws, and now they wish to sit among us. Another wave of laughter swept through the chamber. To the Galactic Council, humanity was a joke, but not everyone was laughing. In a far corner of the chamber, a single human stood. Ambassador Daniel Hayes remained calm, his face betraying no emotion. He had heard every insult, every mocking word. He had expected this. Slowly, he stepped forward and cleared his throat. The chamber quieted, though some aliens still smirked at the sight of a lone human in their midst. Lords of the Galactic Council, Daniel began, his voice steady. Humanity does not seek war. We do not seek conflict. We seek only respect, cooperation, and our rightful place among the stars. Chancellor Vorel scoffed. And if we deny you? Daniel did not flinch. Then you will regret it. Silence fell over the chamber. The smirks disappeared. Some council members exchanged uneasy glances. The way Daniel spoke, it was not a threat. It was a warning. Vorel chuckled, though there was nervousness in his eyes. Regret. You overestimate yourselves, human. Your kind is weak, your military laughable. If we wish, we could crush your planet in a single day. Daniel stared at him, unblinking. Then try. Murmurs spread across the chamber. Some council members shifted uncomfortably. Others looked amused. Enough of this nonsense, Supreme Governor Alfak said impatiently. The decision has been made. Humanity's request for a seat in the Galactic Council is denied. Daniel did not react. He simply nodded once, as if he had already known their answer. Very well, he said. But remember this moment. Remember this decision. With that, he turned and walked toward the exit, his footsteps echoing in the silent chamber. No one stopped him. As the great doors closed behind him, an eerie feeling settled over the council. For the first time, they wondered if they had made a mistake. But it was too late, because humanity had heard their answer, and now they would give their own. The denial of humanity's request for recognition by the Galactic Council spread across the known universe in mere hours, transmitted through the vast interstellar communication networks that linked the empires of the stars, and while most species paid little attention, seeing it as nothing more than another weak race being put in its place, there were a few who watched with curiosity, and fewer still who watched with concern, for they had seen something in Ambassador Daniel Hayes' eyes that others had failed to notice. Certainty, not desperation. In the following days, debates raged across different star systems, with some alien scholars questioning the Council's arrogance in dismissing humanity so easily, arguing that the Terrans had built their civilization in record time, mastering space travel in mere centuries, while other species had taken millennia. And while their military was still relatively untested against the great fleets of the galaxy, there was something unsettling about their determination, something unnatural about how quickly they adapted, how fiercely they fought when cornered, how they never seemed to know when to surrender. But the Galactic Council did not listen to these voices of caution. for they had ruled unchallenged for over 10,000 years, their empires so vast that entire civilizations had risen and fallen within their dominion. And to them, the idea that a species as young as humanity could ever be a threat was laughable, so much so that the topic of Earth was soon forgotten, drowned beneath discussions of more important matters, such as border disputes and trade agreements, leaving them utterly blind to what was coming. Meanwhile, far from the grand halls of the Galactic Council, in the cold darkness of space, humanity was already preparing its answer. A response not of words, not of diplomacy, but of actions that would shake the very foundations of the universe, for they had long suspected that the Council would reject them, had even counted on it. And now, freed from the chains of negotiation, they no longer had to hold back, no longer had to pretend to be weak, no longer had to follow the rules of an empire that saw them as nothing more than an inconvenience. Across the Sol system, in vast shipyards orbiting Mars and Titan, fleets were being constructed in secret, ships unlike anything the galaxy had seen before, their hulls forged from metals far stronger than those used by the other races, their weapon systems designed not for intimidation or defense, but for total annihilation, and at their heart, the most terrifying technology of all, human ingenuity, a force that had allowed them to turn even the deadliest environments into thriving colonies, a force that had transformed them from fragile primates into the dominant species of an entire world, and soon it would do the same to the stars. But while their fleets were growing, humanity did not announce its intentions, did not issue threats or ultimatums, for they knew that true power was not declared. It was demonstrated, and so, instead of challenging the Council openly, they did something far more dangerous. They vanished, withdrawing all diplomats from foreign worlds, cutting off communications with the larger galactic community, turning their home system into a fortress so impenetrable that even the most advanced spies of the Council could not see what was happening inside, leaving the galaxy to wonder whether the Terrans had finally accepted their place beneath the ruling species, or if they were simply waiting for the right moment to strike. For a time, the Galactic Council found this silence amusing, dismissing it as a sign of humanity's submission, believing that the so-called warriors of Earth had realized their inferiority and had chosen to disappear quietly rather than face humiliation, and in their arrogance, they laughed at the species they had just rejected, making mockery of their warnings, never realizing that in the vast darkness of space, something was awakening, something that would soon make them beg for the mercy they had refused to grant. The Galactic Council, confident in its dominance over the known universe, paid no further attention to humanity. To them, the matter was settled. The upstart species had been denied recognition, rejected as a galactic power, and forced back into the obscurity from which it had come. Their silence only reinforced this belief. It was assumed that, like countless other civilizations before them, humanity had realized its place in the grand hierarchy and chosen to accept their insignificance. For months, the great empires of the galaxy continued as they always had, locked in their endless cycles of diplomacy, politics, and minor conflicts. Trade agreements were signed, alliances were forged and broken, and the Council continued its role as the unquestioned ruler of the stars. No one suspected that, in the void of space, an invisible storm was gathering strength. Then, without warning, the first sign of humanity's return came. It started as a series of unexplained disappearances. Entire patrol fleets that ventured too close to the Sol system simply vanished without a trace. Investigations were launched, but no wreckage was ever found. No distress signals were ever received. The Council dismissed these incidents as anomalies, navigation errors, piracy, or internal malfunctions. But a growing unease began to take root in the minds of the more observant species. And then, the outposts started going dark. At first it was just a single remote station, a deep space listening post positioned near the edges of human territory, manned by a crew of a dozen aliens. One day, its transmission simply stopped. When an investigation team was sent to check, they found nothing. No bodies, no debris, No signs of struggle. It was as if the station had been erased from existence. Then it happened again, and again. One by one, key council installations along the borders of human space were silenced, their crews missing, their data wiped clean. Entire convoys of supply ships disappeared mid-flight, their cargo never reaching its destination. A sense of unease spread through the ranks of the Council's admirals, for while no one could prove it, they all began to suspect the same terrible truth. Humanity had not disappeared. They had been watching, preparing, waiting. Despite this, the Council still refused to acknowledge the threat. They sent their most advanced scout vessels deep into human space, believing that their technology would allow them to uncover whatever secrets the Terrans were hiding. None returned. Then the first survivor was found. A damaged escape pod, floating on the fringes of the neutral zone, was recovered by a passing merchant ship. Inside, they found a single alien, a navigator from one of the missing patrol fleets, barely clinging to life. His wounds were severe, his body covered in burns and deep lacerations, but it was the terror in his eyes that truly unsettled those who found him. When he finally awoke, the first words he spoke sent shockwaves through the galaxy. "The humans, they are coming." News of this survivor's warning spread quickly, but the Council dismissed it as delirium, the ramblings of a soldier who had barely survived an unknown catastrophe. They refused to believe that the Terrans were capable of such precision, such ruthlessness, such cold, methodical warfare. Even as the disappearances continued, even as entire fleets were lost without a fight, the ruling powers of the galaxy clung to their arrogance. But deep within their fortified worlds, behind their bravado and political games, fear was beginning to fester. The greatest empires of the universe were beginning to ask themselves the question they had ignored for far too long. What if we were wrong about humanity? Their answer would come soon. And by the time they realized their mistake, it would already be too late. The Galactic Council had ruled the stars for thousands of years, dictating the fate of countless civilizations. Empires rose and fell under their guidance, their strength unchallenged. The lesser species obeyed, for they knew defiance was a death sentence. The Council's power was absolute, until now. Something was happening. Fear spread through the Council's high-ranking officials, whispered behind closed doors. Entire fleets had vanished. Outposts gone. Supply lines shattered. The few survivors who had returned spoke only of dark shapes in the void, of silent hunters that struck without warning. They described an enemy that did not fight with numbers, nor brute strength, but precision, patience, and terrifying efficiency. Despite the growing unease, the Council still refused to acknowledge the truth. Humanity, after all, was a minor species, barely a footnote in the grand history of the galaxy. Their technology was centuries behind that of the greater empires. Their numbers were too few to threaten the great fleets of the Council. They were weak, primitive, insignificant, or so they believed. But arrogance had always been the downfall of empires. The Council finally decided to act. A fleet was assembled, a massive force of warships from across the galaxy, each equipped with the most advanced weaponry ever developed. Commanded by Admiral Xelos, a veteran of 100 wars, the fleet was to be a show of power, a warning to humanity. "We will remind them of their place," Xelos had declared before his departure. His fleet never returned. The first distress signals arrived 3 days later, garbled, panicked transmissions from warships under attack. The messages were filled with screams, static, and horror. Then nothing. Silence. Over 1,000 ships gone. The Council was stunned. How? How could a backwater species destroy an armada without even revealing themselves? What kind of weapons had they developed in secret? What had they become in the shadows? The realization came too late. Across the galaxy, human warships emerged from nowhere, striking at the heart of the Council's power. Their ships did not match the designs the Council had on record. These were not the clunky vessels of a fledgling species. They were something else entirely. Faster, stronger, smarter, built for war. The Council's fleets were overwhelmed, not by numbers, but by strategy. The humans fought with a precision that the galaxy had never seen before, each strike calculated, each maneuver designed to cause maximum devastation. They did not engage in direct battles unless they had already won before the first shot was fired. They chose their fights, striking at fuel depots, command centers, and supply lines, crippling the great powers of the galaxy without ever needing to face them head-on. The panic spread like wildfire. For the first time in millennia, the Galactic Council, the rulers of the stars, were losing a war. Then came the most terrifying message of all. A lone human transmission, broadcasted across the galaxy, delivered in a voice that carried no hatred, no anger, only a cold, merciless certainty. You should have listened to the warnings. The war had only just begun. The Galactic Council had underestimated humanity for too long. Their arrogance had blinded them. Their hubris had deafened them to every warning. But now, the truth was undeniable. Humanity was not weak. They were predators, and the Council had just stepped into their hunting ground. Panic spread like wildfire across the core worlds of the Council's vast empire. Fleets had been wiped out without a trace. Supply lines had been shattered. Planets that once held billions now sent desperate distress signals, begging for aid that would never come. The Council had ruled for thousands of years, but in just a few months, their power was crumbling. The terrifying part: no one had even seen a single human soldier. There were no invasions, no planetary occupations, no grand speeches from conquering warlords. Humanity did not fight like the Council's enemies of the past. They did not send armies to die in the trenches. They did not wage wars of attrition. They struck from the darkness. Every Council fleet sent to retaliate vanished without a trace. Entire warships were found adrift, their crews missing, their weapons disabled. Military outposts were reduced to rubble, destroyed with surgical precision. There were no survivors to tell the tale, only eerie silence, as if the humans themselves were ghosts haunting the void. Then came the night of terror. On the Council's capital world, High Chancellor Verac stood before his advisors, watching the unfolding nightmare. A dozen fleets had been mobilized, warships from every major species in the Council, all desperate to turn the tide. They had gathered at the last stronghold of the Empire, a fortress world surrounded by millions of defense satellites, planetary shields, and the largest fleet ever assembled in galactic history. They will not break through this, Verac had declared. He was wrong. The attack began without warning. There was no grand fleet charging into battle, no army announcing its presence. Instead, the stars themselves seemed to flicker, and then, darkness. Every communication channel was cut. Every satellite went offline. The massive planetary shields that had stood for centuries suddenly collapsed, their generators failing without explanation. The fleets orbiting the planet scrambled for control, but it was already too late. One by one, the warships vanished, not exploded, not destroyed in battle. They simply disappeared, as if something had reached out from the abyss and dragged them into the void. Panic erupted across the planet. The Council's armies rushed to their positions, but the attack was already inside their walls. Explosions rippled through the city as someone hunted the leaders of the Galactic Council. It was the first time anyone had seen them. Not machines, not drones, humans. They moved through the capital like shadows, unstoppable, merciless, silent. Council guards fired their weapons, but the humans vanished before the bullets reached them. Some officers screamed, ordering their men to fight back, only to be cut down before they could finish their sentence. One by one, the highest leaders of the Galactic Council fell, their palaces and bunkers breached as if they were made of paper. Chancellor Verac, once the most powerful being in the galaxy, ran. For the first time in his long life, he felt something he had never known before: fear. He reached the last safe room, his hands trembling as he slammed the emergency lockdown. The thick metal doors sealed around him, reinforced walls thicker than a starship's hull. He collapsed, gasping for breath, his mind unable to process what had just happened. Then, a voice filled the room. "Did you really think a door would stop us?" Verak froze. The lights flickered. The security cameras died. The air grew cold. Then, the doors opened on their own. And standing in the doorway, bathed in the flickering red glow of the emergency lights, was a single human soldier. No armor, no weapons, just a figure in the darkness. The last thing Verak saw was the soldier's cold, emotionless eyes. Then, the Galactic Council was no more. The fall of the Galactic Council sent shockwaves across the universe. Species that had once cowered under the Council's rule now found themselves free, but also terrified. The ones who had mocked humanity, dismissed them as weak or worse, tried to control them, now realized their mistake far too late. News spread like wildfire. Entire civilizations whispered in fear of what had happened. No one knew the full story. There were no survivors to explain how the Council's fleets had been wiped out, how their leaders had disappeared overnight, how their capital had been reduced to ruins without a single recorded battle. Only one truth remained. Humanity had answered, and the universe would never be the same. Across the stars, rulers and warlords convened in secret. The greatest minds of dozens of species tried to understand what had gone wrong. How had the humans done this? What kind of weapons had they used? Where was their fleet? Where were they now? But there were no answers. Only silence. Then came the first message. It arrived without warning, hacking into every major communication system in the galaxy. No origin, no sender, just a simple transmission, broadcasted on every frequency, appearing on every screen, reaching the highest leaders of every surviving empire. A single sentence. "You are all on notice." It was not a declaration of war. It was not an offer of peace. It was a warning, one that sent every ruler into a panic. For weeks, chaos gripped the galaxy. The once mighty empires scrambled to prepare for the worst, fearing that humanity's next step would be their complete destruction. Some surrendered outright, sending desperate messages begging for mercy, pleading for a truce. Others tried to strengthen their defenses, preparing for an invasion that never came. But humanity did not strike again. Instead, they simply vanished. No fleets arrived, no armies invaded, no messages followed. It was as if humanity had never existed at all. And yet, the fear remained. Planets once loyal to the Galactic Council collapsed into paranoia. Some fell into civil war, their leaders turning on each other, convinced that human infiltrators were among them. Military forces across the galaxy weakened themselves, wasting their strength hunting shadows that did not exist. Trade routes crumbled, economies fell, and entire species lived in constant terror, watching the skies, waiting for the day when humanity would return. That day did not come. Not yet. But every leader, every soldier, every citizen knew one thing. The moment they crossed the line, humanity would be there, watching, waiting. And the next time, they wouldn't stop. The silence that followed humanity's warning became more terrifying than any war. The Galactic Council was gone, and in its place, a void of fear spread across the universe. Every species, every government, every ruler who had once relied on the Council's power now found themselves alone, trapped in the unknown. No one knew when humanity would return. No one knew what they wanted. And worst of all, no one knew if they had already infiltrated every corner of the galaxy. Paranoia ran wild. Former allies turned against each other, accusing one another of working with humanity. Spies were hunted down, military forces were stretched thin, and in many places, entire governments collapsed under their own fear. But it wasn't just fear that spread. Hope, a dangerous, reckless hope, began to grow among the oppressed. For centuries, the Galactic Council had ruled with an iron grip, crushing any species that dared to resist. Planets had been stripped of their resources, civilizations reduced to little more than workers for the elite. But now the council was gone, and humanity had proven that their so-called unstoppable rulers were nothing but mortals, ones who had simply met their end at the hands of a species they had mocked. Whispers of rebellion turned into roaring flames. Across the stars, the enslaved, the forgotten, the beaten down began to rise up. They didn't know where humanity had gone, but they knew one thing. If the humans had destroyed the council, then maybe, just maybe, they had been watching all along. Maybe they were waiting to see who was worthy. In hidden chambers and underground bunkers, rebel leaders gathered. They did not speak of fear. They spoke of change, of a new future. A future where they would prove themselves. A future where, one day, when humanity finally returned, they would not need to beg for salvation. They would stand beside them. As warriors, as equals, and the galaxy, forever changed, would never be the same again.